Right, okay. You lot, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can catch all of our videos. And if you're really interested in the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London. You'll find over 1,000 videos and thousands of images. We're moderated and friendly. Come and give us a try.
Welcome back. More on my life working inside the Kray firm during their heyday times of the 1960s. I was Reggie Kray's personal minder. I was paid to growl at people and collect the protection money, and I continue my story. If you were known to be on the firm, there was a lot of money to be picked up on the side. I had a lot of separate earners. This was Albert Donoghue's private enterprise, my own work. It was nothing to do with the twins. I was still freelance in that sense, but obviously the fact that I was known to be on the Kray firm gave me a leg up in getting all this type of outside business. The twins didn't quarrel with that. They knew you couldn't exist on what they were paying you. Let's say you went out and you nicked £1,000 from people on behalf of the twins. All you got out of it was a score, or 25 quid. You only got expenses and drinking beer vouchers. Other people say I was getting £100 a week with the twins, but that would only have been if we'd had an exceptional hit. If the twins knew somebody on the firm was getting a regular £100 a week off them, they would have gone potty. They were getting scarcely £100 each themselves. But I could certainly pick up a lot more than £100, with all my own private nips added in. For instance, while I was minding the Starlight, I always needed a cab to get there. It was up in the West End, off Oxford Street, and it didn't open till 11 o'clock at night. So I'm waiting for a cab one night, and the manager of the cab firm says, "Could we have a talk? We're in a bit of trouble." I said, "We'll leave it till later, yeah? I got to go to work. I'll see you down the Regency when I get back." So I get back there about 3 in the morning. By this time I've had a few drinks, and he says, "We're getting a bit of trouble with scrub calls. People are phoning for cabs, but when they get to the address, there's nobody there. So it's a waste of time." Also, in those days, there weren't any radio cabs. The drivers had to carry a pile of sixpences with them and call back on the phone, so getting a scrub call was a big aggravation. So I said, "Well, why don't you stop it?" He said, "Well, how?" the guy asked. The bloke was lost. So I said, "Well, I ain't going to do it for a pension. Bring me in on the firm." So he said, "All right, very quickly." I said 60-40, and to my surprise, he said, "Yes, all right." So suddenly I've got 60% of the advanced cab company. But now I've got to solve the problem. I just looked at the map, and I tried to work out who can affect him. Where will his competitors be located? He was in Bow Road, so I looked at the map and thought, Mile End Stepney, going towards Hackney, Victoria Park, that way, Poplar and Stratford. Then I picked out all the cab firms and phoned them. I said, "Listen," and I introduced myself. "I've heard that some of your drivers is sending us scrub calls. Now, if this don't stop, if we get one more scrub call, we're going to come round your gaff and disconnect your wiring. You got that clear?" So it stopped straight away. Now, up to that time, my man had 5 owner drivers, but from there we went up to 10 owner drivers, and we were running a nice little business. So that's what he should have done from the start. Only he didn't have any weight behind him to back it up. Sure, now he was giving me 60%, but his turnover was so much increased that he was probably getting twice as much money himself. I did the man a favour. I did myself a favour, but I saved his business. Look at it that way. Today, when they bring these big guys into big companies, management consultants, they do the same thing. They nick a bit, don't they? Far more than we thugs ever did. So, business consultant I was already. Another little earner was a fellow called Bosher. I never knew his real name, but he had a little scrapyard off Queensbridge Road in Bethnal Green. George Dixon, who had his own family firm based in Poplar, had been round threatening Bosher for money, so he'd come to the twins for help. Ronnie told him, Albert will look after it. So my scheme was to phone George and tell him to leave Bosher alone. We weren't going to do this for nothing, so I went to see Bosher and made it sound more involved than it really was. I asked him for £100 down, and he dragged up £85. Then I told him, well, knowing George, he's not going to let it go with just one meet, so I'll have to keep a regular eye on the place. Bosher said, don't worry, I'll pay you every week, so I said, fair enough. That'll be a tenner, but he could only afford £5. So I would collect a tenner fortnightly. Silly money, but it all added up, and anyway, I didn't have to do any more for it because it was all sorted in one little chat with George. I arranged a meet. We went through a jokey routine, rubbing each other down as if we were likely to be tooled up. And then I said, you're messing about with a very good friend of mine. And he said, well, in that case, I'll leave it out. It was done with a smile and a joke because we weren't enemies at all. We were all in the same game. George Dixon was a flash guy. When he came into a place, he was always shouting and hollering. He'd shout just for a drink, and if anybody so much as glanced at him, it would be, who you looking at, sunshine? Once he went too far and said something that upset Ronnie Kray. The next time he was in the Regency, Ronnie stuck an automatic in his face and pulled the trigger. But the gun didn't fire. He pulled it again, and it still didn't work. So Ronnie gave up and presented George with the bullet. The Colonel must have been in a pretty good mood to let him off that light. Our relationship with the Dixon gang had other ups and downs. Once the twins called me at 3 a.m. to go to the Regency, where George's brother, Alan, was terrifying people. When I arrived, I told him to behave himself and that he owed me a score for getting me out of bed, for my cab fares and for the aggravation. He said, Albert, I've only got a tenner on me, but if you come round the house in the morning, you can get the other 10. So I said, just give the tenner and we'll call it a night. I think he believed he was playing with somebody new to the game. 3 years after the Krays went down, the Dixons found themselves playing against Commander Bert Wickstead, who accused them of trying to take over where the twins had been stopped. Alan got a 9-year jail sentence, George got a 12. A lot of what we did was opportunistic. We'd see how far we could go and get away with it. I was astonished at what even other villains would put up with. Not everything took the form of a weekly payment, but there was something else we called the nip. This was used on pubs and clubs where we couldn't get a regular pension. So we would nip them about once a month by putting up some story to justify a special payment. We did this to the Barry brothers. Not only did we do them over the forged fivers, but we were always thinking up excuses to clip them for a few quid. We nipped them so often that we decided what they really needed was a protection deal from us. Late one night, the twins sent me, Ronnie Hart and Dickie Morgan, their old mate from military prison days, down the Regency to tell Johnny Barry what we wanted. We knew people were in there, but they wouldn't open the door. So we went through the cab entrance at the back. Johnny wasn't there, so the doorman gave him a ring and he came down. I told him the twins want £50 a week. He wasn't too pleased, but he agreed on the understanding that the nipping would stop. So from then, I or young Ronnie Hart would pick up the Regency 50. Later, the Barrys wanted it down to 20, and somehow the twins agreed. Then Johnny Barry tried to get away with not paying anything. So me and Ronnie Hart went in and boosted it back up to 50. We didn't tell the twins till later, when we explained how Johnny had tried to wriggle out of the deal, so he needed to be taught a lesson. The moral to this story is that protection is a circular racket. Any trouble in the Regency, we were causing it. Then we were paid to stop it. When the Barrys dared to appeal, we made it clear the trouble would start again. The twins went and spoke to them, and it was all put back as it was. If the firm had its claws into you, there was no way you could get free. Some nips were done more for a laugh than because we needed the money. Sometimes the Evening Standard, or Evening News, would have a sensational front-page report headed, say, Payroll Robbery in Shoreditch, or Wages Snatch in Bishopsgate. So a pair of us would go in a pub or club where we were known as villains, and where the landlord was a bit iffy too. And we'd go up to the bar and drop the paper on the counter, so the governor could see the headlines. We'd have our ties undone and our hair messed up, and we'd whisper to each other over a couple of light ales. The governor would pick this up, he'd see us carrying on in a very furtive way, then he'd see the newspaper, we'd have another whisper, and he'd go, "Oh shit." As it dawned on him that we must have been on the robbery, we'd say, "Look, Harry, we're in a bit of shtuck. How about 40 or 50 shots? Just some running round money till we get our share." He'd put two and two together, and he'd hand over the dough, no questions. He can't really refuse. He could call the police, but it's all aggro. He'd rather give us the money. And all along we'd never been on the robbery or had anything to do with it. Sometimes people would offer us money to apply our brutality as mercenaries on guys we had no personal quarrel with. These propositions were too much trouble to carry out, but could still be good one-off earners. One day, when I was working for George Mizzle at the Green Dragon, I was approaching the place and a Jewish guy says, "Do you want a bit of work that Billy Maguire used to handle?" I knew this Maguire. He'd been in the Crown when Reggie shot me. He was a hoodlum who claimed he'd been fitted up over a robbery. He got 14 years in jail, came back out, shot a copper, was jailed again, and then disappeared. So I agreed to consider the proposition. We go to a garage in Hackney Road. This guy gets on the phone and then gives me a name and an address. He says, "You do this guy, hurt him, hospitalise him, and you get £250. Then you get another address." That's how Maguire used to do it. That's how it goes. I say, no, that's not how it goes. First of all, it's £300, and I get the first lot of money up front. So I get paid up front. Then I go and watch this guy, who turns out to be a milkman up West Ham way. And I start asking around, and I find out that when the Nazi Party used to walk round Epping Forest in uniform, he was one of them. So this is a Jewish firm that wants these guys done. They've infiltrated this Nazi group and got their names and addresses. Maguire had been making his living by putting these guys in hospital, one after the other, but I cut it short there and then. I took the first £300, but I didn't touch the milkman. It was Mug's work. If I'd been interested, I'd have subcontracted it. I would have got hold of a couple of young tearaways, given them 100 each to go out and do it, and I'd keep 100 myself, but I didn't want it. At that time, I'd been used to going out, doing a payroll job, and getting 4 or 5 grand for my whack. Also, I probably thought this mercenary stuff was beneath me. There was no danger in reneging on a job like that and keeping the money. Who was going to report me to the cops for not fulfilling the contract? Also, I sussed that the man behind the scheme was George Mizell himself. He was superficially legitimate, a licensed bookmaker, as I've said earlier, but he was also London's biggest receiver of stolen jewels. He had a Hatton Garden jewellery repair business, through which he bought and sold bent precious metals, in league with another receiver, Big Matty Constantino. George was into everything. He even owned this garage in Hackney Road, where I was asked to take over the Maguire contract. That's how I knew all this was to do with the Jews. I didn't say I knew. I wasn't supposed to know where the job came from. So either the 300 a hit money was George's, or he was middling for rich, respectable Jews who had turned to the underworld to do this work. Mizell was also in with bent cops. Once I had to collect our Green Dragon protection money from his Hatton Garden premises. I walked into George's room, where he was sitting at his desk, talking to a police detective who could not have been there legitimately because he was on his own. No straight copper would have been allowed to see notorious characters like George and Fat Matty by himself, because anything could be alleged against him, especially on this occasion when a guy called Dennis Stafford was also in the room. Stafford was a colourful, independent villain who was later convicted of a murder in Durham that he always denied committing. When George saw me, he said, "Oh, hello," and Fat Matty handed me an envelope. I said, "Ah, so that old horse won then?" And Matty said, "Yeah. We did this because even if the copper was bent, he didn't need to know this business. And he certainly would have wanted to know that the Kray firm was protecting the godfather of the garden." Back in 1960, before I was on the firm, Mizell and Constantino really needed protection. Not from anyone else, but from me and the boys from Bow. We'd heard they had bought the stash of jewellery stolen from Sophia Loren when she was staying north of London while filming at Elstree. One night, a good source told us that Constantino had only just finished taking all the stones out of their settings. And he now had a whiskey bottle full of rubies, emeralds and diamonds. Our source also said we should get straight down to the Green Dragon, where he would be going later this night. So we drove down and sat in Whitechapel Road, opposite the alleyway leading into the Dragon. Sure enough, we saw him arrive in his Mercedes, go into the Dragon, where he spoke with Mizell, and get back into his car. Now our job was to tail him and mug him for Sophia Loren's stones. But after all this, we lost him in traffic. It's never easy to tail someone, and it wasn't easy even 35 years ago, when there were fewer cars about. Being philosophical, I can console myself by saying that even if we had lifted the jewels, we would have had a job getting rid of them, because Mizell was the main man in this business. He had the trade connections, not just in London, but in Antwerp and New York as well. Whereas we didn't know anybody. We would have had to get someone else to take the stuff abroad, and we would have wound up with peanuts. But there you are. When the stakes were big enough, and Sophia's jewels were worth so much, a dozen villains could have retired on the proceeds. I was prepared to deprive even dear old George Mizell of his dishonest earnings. He never knew we'd got that close, but he would have forgiven me. After all, every thug in London would have done the same.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.